it's now been 6 years since His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI announced that he would resign from the chair of St. Peter. And Tim Gordon and I wanted to just do reflections on, as Catholics, I'm a convert, he's a Cradle Catholic. What have we been thinking over the past 6 years under this reign of Pope Francis? Also, we're going to have some thoughts on the actual resignation of Pope Benedict XVI. So, Tim, welcome back. 6 years.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been quite a ride.
It has been a ride.
I don't know how else
if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Has it been a ride at all? It was strange time to come of age in the church, isn't it?
Yeah, for me, it's just my wife and I have had this conversation several times. Like, what did we get into? I became a Catholic because as an Anglican priest, I was given a ticket while I was in Rome to go to Mass on the feast, Candlemas, the feast of the Presentation of Christ, February 2nd, with Pope Benedict XVI. My wife and I went to Mass with Pope Benedict XVI. And I was there in St. Peter's wearing clericals as an Anglican priest. Imagine that. And when it came time for communion, I knew I couldn't receive communion, and I knew I was in schism. I knew I was in heresy as an Anglican priest, and I knew I needed to be reconciled with the Holy See. With that man up on the high altar in St. Peter's, Benedict, I was standing kind of, Tim, the spot in St. Peter's where the bronze statue of St. Peter is with the foot that you kiss that gets rubbed down.
Most deaf, yeah.
Yeah, so I was standing just a little bit, maybe 10 feet to the door, towards the back, right there during Mass with Pope Benedict. And so that, for me, my conversion is deeply wrapped up with the person of Benedict. So to see him say, like, peace, I'm out, it's hurtful. I'm just going to admit it. It's hurtful. It's like my dad, he was like my stepdad, I came into the family. And then after I was in, he was just like, yeah, I'm just not feeling it. Bye. Yeah.
Got to feel that way for a convert. But no regrets, right?
No regrets. At all. I'm in it to win it.
I know you are.
Hate the player, not the game.
Right,
I'm in it.
Yeah,
I'm in it. But it hurts. Like, it's deeply, the longer it goes on, we're in year 6, the longer it goes on, the more it hurts because of what we're living through.
Yeah. But also for the record, I knew that. I just wanted you to say that for the
What? Hate the player, not the game. What?
Well, I knew that, but I knew that in an applied way to Taylor Marshall and the Roman Catholic faith.
Right. And I'm not saying that I hate Benedict. I'm just using whatever this is called. What is it? Urban lingo.
Urban dictionary.
Yeah, which means you don't leave the church over a bad priest, bishop, pope, right? You're in it for the game, not for the players. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's right. It's
the game.
Disregard
the game meaning be a Catholic, don't go to hell.
Right.
Go to heaven.
Disregard the player, pay attention to the game. That's what the urban hipsters mean to say.
Yes.
Yeah, and from the we don't plan it out this way, but it ends up being a kind of having nice symmetry to express ourselves in one half, the convert, and then in the counterpart half, the Cradle Catholic.
Yep.
From the point of view of the latter, of course, it was, I grew up all my life, like anybody my age, give or take, few years, under the pontificate of JP2. I never knew anything else before JP2. Sometimes when we talk about that pontificate, maybe it's just normalcy bias, and people refer to John Paul the Great. I can't but help think, and I know this is for another show on another pontificate, but I can't help but think, I remember growing up in the 80s and then the early 90s, and it wasn't that great. So it just seems like if we were under like Leo XIII or something, it really would have been palpably great. But I never had any hostility. I just think of it as sort of the kind of post-conciliar, worse than mediocre 80s when I was going to Catholic school and not believing any of it and being catechized in a really silly, puerile way. But so I never thought of JP2's pontificate as great or really bad. But Benedict was the second pope under which I was Catholic, and I was excited about him intellectually as a young man who liked to study text, who'd given his life over to the examination of texts. He was just really exciting. He was like an intellectual grandparent. Because like finding out that your grandpa was, Monsignor Lemaitre or something like that, you'd be proud. I was proud. And
well, it'd be kind of weird if your grandfather was a Monsignor.
Well, that wouldn't work. Well, okay, a great uncle.
It's like,
if you found out your grandpa's Lemaitre, then you're like, wow, he really was a mischief maker. But I hadn't thought of that.
Every analogy has its limits.
It does, like logistical limits,
right?
But I mean, yeah, that's the point. I felt disappointed because he was the first pope that I'd ever been personally excited by. Unlike the rest of the world, who's basically, secular media is excited for the first time ever by his successor. So it was really disappointing. And we'll get to discussion of reactions from that day. But it was disappointing to me as a Cradle Catholic because I'd been so excited by the Benedict pontificate the whole time, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, just to give people a ecumenical viewpoint, when Benedict XVI was elected, I was in a room with a bunch of Anglicans, Episcopalians, and someone came in the room like, the Catholic Church just elected Ratzinger. And we're like, yeah, because we like the book Spirit of the Liturgy. We liked Ad Orientem. Anglicans, we had not very good theology and really good liturgics and aesthetics. Like the 11th commandment is do nothing in bad taste. Everything looks great. The music is perfect, right? Very intentional about all that. So we liked Ratzinger, and Ratzinger is an aesthetic guy. I mean, he wrote the Spirit of the Liturgy. He was pro Ad Orientem. He wanted, in many ways, a return in an aesthetic to return tradition. The longer I'm Catholic, the longer I'm removed from Pope Benedict XVI's pontificate, the more I worry, Tim, I'm concerned about this, that Ratzinger's appreciation and affection for tradition or traditionalism is more aesthetic. That is, it's more into the beauty and the sentiment than it is the actual doctrine dogma. And you meet some trads like this out in the world, they're maybe, kind of wishy-washy on theology, but they just really love all the incense and the bells and the fancy vestments and the
beards.
Silks, well, not so much the beards, the lace cotta's and the linen and all of those things,
You do.
They're more of an Oscar Wilde and not so much an Elton John with the glitter.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's a clever way of avoiding a major politically incorrect inconvenience. So I like it.
Right.
And I agree with that. And from my part, since we're going here first, what I worry about is that Benedict's. I guess it's a similar, just slightly different iteration. I worry that Benedict, to put it in terms we've all read before, never got over his fascination with Karl Rahner the way they said he did.
Yes.
I worry that, and worst case scenario, and that much seems almost apparent when you look at some of the facts that I think we'll have to look at here today. But I worry that it's like a false Hegelian dialectic, the narrative that is that Benedict was this big reformer, and a big conservative, and even the opposition to him was somewhat played up or stunted, right? I find that unlikely ultimately when we consider the phenomenon that caused us to do several videos on its own, the St. Gallen Mafia that arose in opposition to his eventual pontificate before it existed. But I mean, because they didn't really know it would be found out. However, they did so flippantly kind of betray themselves later, you know, in an autobiography of Cardinal Daniels or whatever. So that kind of re-instigated the issue in my mind. Could this be a false Hegelian dialectic? That's where, you know, he's really not a right winger at all. And, he, you know, it's just throwing a bone to the people that are not SSPX, that stayed within the church, but have pretty much all of the same sympathies and sensibilities. Right. You know? So his retirement definitely leads you in that direction a little bit, or can if you're on an imaginative day, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, this also raises the question, like you said, his affection and sympathies for Karl Rahner, who's bad news all day here on TNT, not fans at all. He's been sitting here for 6 years under the reign of Pope Francis, and he hasn't really said anything. You know, I keep going back to this, that the only person in the church who can fix the current crisis is Benedict. He's the one who can come out and say something, right? Yeah. But he doesn't. He's quiet. And people will say, well, that's because they're poisoning him. That's because he's locked away in a room and all that. Look, he's got an iPhone. He's got something. Yeah. He's got secretaries. This is papal intrigue. You can sneak a note. I mean, Napoleon was sneaking notes out. And things can be done. And to resign the papacy and to watch what has happened and to read the statements of Pope Francis and to see the controversy around McCarrick, which deeply involves Benedict XVI. Yes. And to say and to do nothing bothers me.
Remember that scene in Cool Hand Luke when the guys, you know, it's one of the times Luke escapes prison and all the guys are building up his mythos. Oh, he's out doing stuff, and he sends them even a picture of him with the two women, and he's giving the guys hope. And but then the guards take him back and they break his spirit, and they're making him fill in a ditch and then redig it, then fill it in, then redig it. The guys are all watching him, right? And they're like they're having their illusions disenchanted, destroyed before their very eyes. And it pans to a discussion that Dragline, his main kind of disciple, is having with the guys, and Drag won't believe it. He's like, no, he's just setting up another joke, you know, another prank on the guards. This couldn't be him. They're seeking to cover the spread, right? To cover the explanatory gap, that is. And I feel like that's what all of us do when you're describing, you know, Benedict sitting there in his residence, you know, watching the papacy
in his white cassock, in his red shoes, in his papal ring, in his white zucchetto.
Right. His papal stuff, his papal clothes.
He's dressed like a pope.
He's sitting there dressed like a pope at his own preference, right? He refused to turn that stuff in, and he's sitting there and considering that, and he hears more of it than we do, I'm guessing, because he's right there. He's hearing the daily, started out just monthly, first 2 years of the pontificate. Then the next 2 years it was weekly. And now it's almost daily. There's been some sort of mini scandal, just usually escaping the mouth of the pontiff. And it's him. I mean, this is it. I mean, so we have to cover this. When you quit a lifetime tenure position, when you quit one, and that violates the norm, right? A lifetime tenure position that is set up, it's both hardwired and softwired to enable you to die in that position and even have a death spiral, the way JP2 did. I want to talk about that too, because people will say he'd watch JP2 go through this. Then, and you quit, you have to have a super extenuating circumstance. And all he had at the time, he offered a few different rationales for this, but at the time he just said, I'm really weak. I'm really old. But then it's 4, 5, 6 years later, and he starts giving interviews more around the 4-year mark saying, I feel great. I never feel better. Don't do that. I mean, you can't do that. When you quit because of health, you'd better eventually kick the bucket, or people are going to say what we're saying. And I don't think we should be called conspiracy theorists when you're supposed to die in office. You don't die in office. You say, but I'm about to die. And then it's just all of a sudden 6, 7, 12, 20 years later. How long does this story go?
Right. Yeah, it's confusing. Yeah, you at least help them say, well, how you doing? I'm feeling really bad,
I'm miserable.
Yeah. So, and honestly, he doesn't look great in the photos. He's not a spring chicken. He looks like an old man. I understand that. But, look at Leo XIII. When Saint Therese, the little flower, met Leo XIII, she met him because she wanted a dispensation to enter the convent of Mount Carmel early. It's a great, touching story. It's probably my favorite story in the life of the little flower, Saint Therese. She writes, this is in her memoirs, or her letters, correspondence. She writes to her sister saying, the Pope looked like he was dead, like a dead man. He was so old when she met him, hardly hanging on there.
Wow. And she never seen a really old person before or whatever?
I guess not this old. She said
most of them look like it.
She says he looks like he's dead. That was her impression of meeting Pope Leo.
How old was he at that point?
I think...
Was he nearly 90, the way Benny 16 is?
Yeah, because Benedict XVI right now is 91. And I read something recently 91. That he's about to be the oldest pope ever because he's about to be older than Leo. But that doesn't make sense because is the Pope Benedict a pope? Is he the oldest pope ever? I don't...
So many issues here. Yeah. I mean... It's not an emeritus tenure kind of thing. So I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows.
No.
I mean...
Okay, so Leo XIII was 93 when he died, and Benedict is 91. And I just want to bring up something. Leo XIII, who died in, was it 1903? Yeah, 1903. He didn't have antibiotics and painkillers and... Tempur-Pedic beds and motor scooters like John Paul II. He was living in basically, I guess that, they'd have electricity and stuff, but he was basically living at how medieval popes lived.
He didn't have penicillin.
Yeah.
I mean, people forget this at the beginning of the 20th century. They didn't have penicillin.
So Leo XIII was living with none of the medical comforts of our time. We'll say it again. Leo XIII needs to be canonized. I'm writing this book, Tim, about it I'm writing on the resignation of Benedict and the 100-year lead up. And I just finished a section on Leo XIII and just doing the research for it. I'm completely impressed by Leo XIII. I just keep coming back to Leo XIII. Solid.
He's my favorite. He's my favorite ever. Yeah.
Did you know he wrote 4 encyclicals against Freemasonry?
I did.
Amazing.
I knew he wrote 75 total encyclicals.
I think it was 80 something, actually.
Was he? Well,
maybe that includes apostolic letters.
But the point is that people aren't hearing. He had a 25-year papacy. That means he's writing over 3 a year. He also wrote Arcanum on the family, which I'm citing a lot, working on this feminism book. I mean, everything he touched was gold. And again, to get back to what we're saying about Benedict, we took him that way in real time. You as a convert, me as a cradle Catholic. It's like, I thought he was like the best it got. He did great work on Islam. After Regensburg, I looked up some of his works. He teamed up with an Italian intellectual called Marcello Pera, write some great stuff on Islam. And you start assuming if someone writes really shrewdly, incisively on one topic, they're that way on all of them. And
right.
It was a setup for disappointment, I believe, to have an 8-year pontificate that was, at the time we didn't know this, but that was had a storied beginning. He had to fight just to take the chair, right. Against this St. Gallen Mafia that had opposed him bitterly, and then he just gives it to him. I some mornings I wake up worried that some sort of compromise had been struck, when with the St. Gallen Mafia. Okay, I'll stick around for a little bit, but a credible amount of time, and then I'll get out of here, and you can get your guy in. But
that makes him the worst pope of all time. He's basically conspiring. And by the way, folks, we know that Bergoglio was number 2 on the ballots back in what was the conclave? 2004. 2005.
Sorry.
2005, the runner-up on that ballot was a guy named, nobody knew who he was. Yeah, I don't think so. Right. It was Bergoglio.
He made a last-minute run, Bergoglio did.
That's right.
And I mean, yeah, some people knew who he was because he was getting voted for. But it is interesting that he was not one of the favorites going into that conclave. I don't even think he was mentioned as papabile before the conclave.
No.
But he made a run at the last minute and nearly overtook Ratzinger, who everyone expected to be pope.
Right. And we know from Daniels that the plan was Bergoglio. The perfect thing about Bergoglio that people are just now realizing is he's South American, and that was key because of liberation theology. But he's also Italian by ethnicity, and he was trained theologically in Germany. So on all 3 headings...
Well, and jazz. He's a jazz.
And he's a jazz, right. So 4 headings, he's got an A+. So he's the ultimate papal candidate for the St. Gallen Mafia.
For them, yeah.
For them. Another thing about Ratzinger that I kind of knew about his background, but I thought, oh, well, he's more conservative now is, as you said, he was Ronner's mini-me. It's getting deep, right? he was like, Ratzinger, you complete me, right?
Yeah.
They were buds. And in 1993, in an interview, so this is pre-Benedict time, but he says, I see no break in my views as a theologian. So he still has this affinity for the Nouvelle Théologie. And we're going to do some videos on Nouvelle Théologie. We got so much news, folks. Everybody's like, do a video on this, do a video on that. I mean, when these news stories come out, we got to address them. But when we get a little lull, if we ever do, and let me tell you, 2019, there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out. We'll do Nouvelle Théologie. Now, originally, Ratzinger was part of this journal Communio. We've talked about it. And this was a break-off of the journal Concilium. And Concilium was Hans Kung, Ronner, Schillebeeckx, all the villains that we discussed.
They're post-conciliar little like cabals almost.
Yeah, so Schillebeeckx we've talked about, he said, hey, we wrote ambiguity into the council and we knew how we would interpret it after the council was closed. So Schillebeeckx and Kung and all these disgraced theologians have a journal called Concilium, which is the #1 journal in the world in the 60s and 70s. People are reading Concilium, and it's completely whack. It's bad. And so, as a reaction, Ratzinger and some others create create a more conservative, more to the right. Like, whoa, these guys are actually going more than Protestant. They're denying the virgin birth. They're denying transubstantiation. They're denying Vatican I and the divine origin of the papacy.
What they were doing with the liturgy before it was released. The
liturgy is just all fun and games. Like where we talked about the presider's chair, the ambo and the altar and what was that last week? All that's going on in Concilium. So some of these guys are tapping the brakes. And they're like, hey, we have to remain Catholic. And these guys were Ratzinger, de Lubac, Balthazar, Bouillet, and Ratzinger. Did I say Ratzinger already? Yeah. These guys start this journal called Communio. And this becomes right-wing. This is so funny now looking back on it. This becomes right-wing conservative Catholicism in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. This is your Ignatius Press. Like we kind of joke around, are you a tan Catholic or an Ignatius Press Catholic? Ignatius Press is your, de Lubac, Balthasar, Ratzinger, far-right conservative. And the priests you meet from the 80s, these JP2 priests who are really conservative, they're all about Balthasar and de Lubac.
Right.
And Ratzinger.
Far right.
I'm not talking about...
In scare quotes.
Yeah. Now, ever since Benedict, we have this new thing called traditionalists, and all along they've been like Garrigou-Lagrange, forget Balthasar, forget de Lubac. That's who we are. I wrote a dissertation against de Lubac.
Right.
So that was kind of the underground movement that no one talked about. But in your mainstream, the conservative far right people were Ignatius Press books, which was your Balthasar, de Lubac, Ratzinger. Oh, I forgot to mention, guess who else was in the Communio conservatives? Casper. I knew Casper. Walter Casper was a conservative.
Right.
So these are the people who John Paul II tapped as the conservative voices in the church in the 80s and in the 90s. And we've all realized since then it was broken. It was bad. That's
what I meant by false dialectic, by the way. When those guys are your conservatives, your ultra trad conservatives, that's the fear. So I mean, it's a strange thing when you find that your conservative heroes are really playing at something else. And again, I think of the image of Dragline being like, we start interpreting everything, every little signal that Benedict puts out. We're like, oh yeah. Like the true believer. Oh, you know why he did that? That was to fool the other guys that he's on their team. It's like, no, he's a German. Germans are, you can't say this with all the backgrounds and ethnicities. Like, well, he's a blank, but you can still do it with Germans. He's a German theologically. And I even read this into what Mueller sometimes waffles about.
Which we talked about in the last video.
Right. They have it hardwired in them, if they are one of the conservatives in Germany, to do a double step and to make, do the Hegelian thing where like, look, I'm not Garrigou-Lagrange here. I'm just saying, let's not trash the mass.
Right.
So it is scary. I mean, Benedict, even as late as 2 springs ago, when he did his interview book with Peter Siebold, he's still out there saying nonsense like, well, when it came to Aquinas, we were just bored. Me and all my buddies, we were just bored and we just wanted something new, like novelty for its own sake. What he said about the Mass, the new liturgy, he'd say it's just a banal novelty or whatever. He was like, that's what we wanted. That's why we liked Ronner. It was new. It's like, well, tons of stuff is new.
Yeah.
But you don't toy with the ontology, metaphysics, liturgy, the things in life that matter just because you're bored. If you're bored, you go get a funny new haircut. It'll grow back.
Right.
But or whatever.
Yeah.
It's serious.
It's serious. Yeah. I mean, another one of Benedict's disciples, as you were speaking there, I thought is Christoph Schönborn.
Yes.
He's Austrian. He's not German, but he's German speaking. And boy, we all thought he was this radical conservative, and he turned out to be just a liberal mess.
I had lots of those conversations, red pilling friends on Schönborn. I remember around the first synod, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's not a conservative. He would do the Napa Valley talks out here in California, which is, again, he was an Ignatius Press type conservative.
Yes.
And a lot of people at Ignatius Press still like him. But
ITI, yeah.
Yep, ITI, yeah.
And I mean, let's take a step back on this. Look at the language of Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, and then you can see a multi-decade trajectory, which is hermeneutic of continuity and reform of the reform. So your guys like Kung and Schillebeck's are hermeneutic of discontinuity, and they're pretty open about it.
They're being honest.
Yeah, they're saying, yeah, we don't really believe in a lot of these dogmatic things that have come down the pipe in Catholicism. So there, and then you have guys who still have devotion, right, and still have a commitment to the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, and these are your guys like Casper, de Lubac, Balthazar, Ratzinger, maybe Schönborn.
I'm not sure about Casper, but go on. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm not sure about all of them when it comes down to like hard tacks, brass tacks. But at least when it comes to, does the Trinity exist? Is there a virgin birth? Should the Mass be a sacrifice or a common meal? All those guys, Balthazar, de Lubac, Casper, Ratzinger, even Schönborn are going to say, yes, it's a sacrifice.
Yeah.
So they're saying we need a hermeneutic, we need reform of the reform, hermeneutic continuity. So when they established Communio, I think that happened in the early 70s. I want to say like somewhere 72 to 75.
I thought it was before. I thought it was in the late 60s. Again,
Communio or Concilium?
I thought the breakoff happened before the Missal of
Communio.
John,
I just looked it up. Communio happened in 72. And the founders, this is interesting. We've named some of them. The founders of Communio were Joseph Ratzinger, Balthazar, de Lubac, Casper, Louis Bouillet, and drumroll please, Mark Ouellet.
Ouellet.
A young Ouellet.
He's that old. Yeah.
So that happened in 72. And this is why people were saying, oh, Ouellet's an arch conservative. He's so far. People are thinking in this dynamic. They're thinking there are two poles in the Catholic Church, Concilium and Communio. Concilium is Küng and Schillebeck's. Communio is your Ratzinger and your Bouillet and your Ouellet and de Lubac. And we have been red-pilling ourselves and people watching and saying, maybe that Hegelian dialectic is all wrong.
False. Or these are moderates being read as the end of the spectrum. What's false? Here's my screen right here, right? And it's like, oh, dude, these guys are in the middle or maybe further to the left than even middle. Right. And I just have been zoomed in on this spectrum where it's like you zoom out and they're right there. It's kind of like what happens to all voting Republicans at some point in their adult life. I hope more people are red-pilled on the Republican Party. Like, it's not a conservative party. It's a less socialist party. Yeah. Right? And you zoom out and this happens, but it happens slower and it happens less frequently with politics in the church, something we have to essentially embrace at this point. I believe in embracing it. Yeah. False Hegelian dialectic to some extent. I mean, how false? That is definitely partly the case. Yeah. It's not arguable. But how much is it the case? Yeah, I was reading one of those articles right after Benedict made his announcement on February 11th from the year. And a couple of them mentioned Mark Ouellet, and they said, a man hailing from the conservative faction. Yes. It's funny when you look back, retrospect is 2020. You have the luxury of, putting yourself in your shoes. If I'd read this article that morning, I might have. I didn't know. I wouldn't know all of it. It's almost like, going back in time, like Back to the Future too. You could look forward like, oh, if I'd known then that Ouellet was going to be this big champ of the Francis pontificate, which he is. Yeah. I would have sniggered as I read that then, as I snigger as I read it now. Yes. Yeah, what's the red pill, the black pill here is we thought Ratzinger Benedict was the great reformer, bringing us back and, interpreting the Second Vatican Council and, cross-pollinating the ordinary form with the extraordinary form. But then we realized that all of his buddies like Casper and Schönborn, etc., are major supporters of Pope Francis. That there's really the hard thing for me is realizing 6 years later that there's more continuity between Benedict and Francis than I was ready to accept. Which Benedict said, startling enough, I think 3 years in, 3 years into this pontificate, about halfway between then and now, he made a statement. I don't have it here to read, but I remember this distinctly, and I have my years pretty straight on the Francis pontificate, just because of during wartime you're sharper. He said there's people should not read a discontinuity between our two pontificates. I look and I see essential continuity.
That's right.
And I thought at the time, again, is he just being polite? You don't have, it's kind of what you said at the beginning of this video. You don't have to be this polite. If you absconded, you left us to this abusive stepfather or whatever image makes people more comfortable, but still does the trick. And you have to say something or do something, even if it's impolite, even if it's impolitic, bad optics. You got to do something at this point. But all he does whenever he pops his head out is he affirms the pontificate, and it makes that whole clarifying picture that you're talking about as you pull back a bit. It makes it all, yes, this is all his buddies are Francisites. I don't know what the hell that St. Gallen Mafia opposed him for so bitterly, right? Because all his friends, a couple of his friends were in the St. Gallen Mafia. Not with friends like that, who needs enemies, right?
Right.
Casper was one of the ones who plotted against him. I don't know what's going on.
Well, I have a take on that.
Does.
No, I have a take on that. I think that when the Concilium Communio divide happened in 1972, I've gone back and looked, and they were writing for one another still. They're still getting together and smoking cigarettes and drinking cappuccinos with each other, right? They're not like excommunicate. It's not like this bitter, like Arian versus, Homoousion Orthodox party fighting to the teeth.
That's what we wanted.
But in reality, we're seeing, because I think of a Hegelian understanding of these Germans, the Concilium and the Communio guys still hung out. They were still all about the newness and the springtime of the council. I think it was John Paul II who galvanized the Communio party. I think John Paul II was conservative enough to say, okay, anyone that was Concilium, Kung, Schilbeck's, that team, the Tübingen nutcases, you guys are out. And I'm going to appoint in my College of Cardinals and for my prefects of the congregations, guys like, and he picked them, Ratzinger, CDF. I'm going to make cardinals of, Balthazar. Balthazar died too early, didn't happen. Casper. So John Paul II galvanized the Communio group. But I think over that time period, you had people on different spectrums within the Communio who were Casper, which is way to the left. And then you've got a guy maybe like Ratzinger who's more to the right. And I kind of wonder if during the long pontificate of John Paul II, within that Communio conservative party, it began to get stretched.
I don't know.
Because there's inconsistency in that position.
Yeah, there's inconsistency with all this. None of it really hangs together as a cohesive theory because he was also incardinating guys like McCarrick, who was uber liberal.
Yes, that's true.
And well known. And we did the whole list of all of the people he made into a bishop, made into an archbishop, and made into a cardinal. And they weren't just Communio type sort of crossover conservative liberals.
Yeah.
They're outright liberals too.
You're right.
I don't know how to connect all the dots.
You're right.
I honestly don't.
I want to be able to say, John Paul II was galvanizing a more conservative, but maybe he wasn't. And that's just part of the hard red pill on John Paul II and Ratzinger. And maybe this whole crisis is for us all to just wipe the sleep out of our eyes and be like, oh my goodness, it's been bad since the 60s, or it's been bad since the 40s. Or, as I'm arguing in my book, it's been bad since the 1800s.
Right.
In Rome.
Late 1800s.
Because Leo XIII, according to his personal secretary, had a vision. There's all sorts of apocryphal stories, and in my book, I'm going to sift what is apocryphal and what is legit. But the oldest story is from the personal secretary of Leo XIII, where he saw Satan and demons gathering upon the city of Rome in the 1880s. So there's a plot. There's a 100-year plot that goes back into the 1880s and runs all the way up into the 1980s, 90s, even into the teens. That's my thesis. So, yeah. And again, as a convert, I don't want this stuff to be true. I want to love John Paul II, and I never really got into the John Paul the Great. Never went that far because I was like, man, Leo the Great and Gregory the Great, that's a high standard.
That is.
I don't know about that. Let's give it some decades.
Yeah, and if there's a second coming of there's Leo the Isaurian. I'm thinking of him, but Gregory, Leo the 13th should be Leo the Great.
No. Look at what Leo the First and Gregory the First did. Leo the 13th doesn't even come. He wrote some good encyclicals. He didn't fight off Attila the Hun with words.
Well, yeah, but he could have. I mean, with all the amount of words he published, with the innovators that he was saying innovators all around me. He's the main one that red pilled me, right? And I'm lucky to have. Yeah, but
Leo the 13th also kind of favored Rampolla, who was maybe a Freemason and the enemy of Pius X. I don't know. It's a debate for another day. Leo the 13th, saint? Yes. The Great? No, I can't go there.
Well, I'd call him that 10 times before John Paul the Great.
Yes.
I mean,
for sure.
Which is a low bar. I mean, to bring it back around to Benedict, by the way, people should need to start this meme. Benedict is the anti-RBG. He is the anti-Ruth Bader Ginsburg, right? He has every reason to stick around in the office, and yet he didn't. Ruth Bader Ginsburg has every reason to leave, and she won't. Right. So that's how people should think about Pope Benedict XVI or whatever you call him now.
Papa Emeritus. Pope Emeritus.
Papa Emeritus. Emeritus is like a professor that sticks around and comes back in.
But Benedict is a professor.
Yeah, and he can be a professor emeritus. I'm just saying he can't be a Papa Emeritus. It doesn't.
Right.
It doesn't make sense. Also, we should make some mention in this show of the lightning that struck St. Peter's twice the night after he made his announcement on February 11, 12.
Yeah, the night of February 11th going into the 12th.
Do we have that pic?
Pic's up. There it is. Yeah.
It's a dope pic.
Why did lightning strike the Vatican that night? Usually it's an omen of God's displeasure.
One would think in this case. I mean,
where were you when he made the announcement? I was teaching a class on Aristotle, I'm glad to say, when we were told the Pope just announced he's resigning, which totally veered the class off of topic. And then I went to Mass. It was a fraternity priest in which the priest said, well, this just doesn't make any sense. I don't understand why the Pope would do this. It is possible to resign. Because people were saying, can you resign, Pope? Most people don't know about Pope Celestine. And he's like, let's hope since today is Our Lady of Lourdes, that Our Lady appeared to him and told him to resign. That was how this priest was in the homily justifying. We were like, okay, yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe Our Lady of Lourdes, because that's today, appeared to him. But it's been kind of a train wreck ever since.
Yeah, I was at work, oil and gas industry, finishing up law school, and people were, I think, talking about it at a media stand. We had these media stands, and they don't really know what the Pope is anyway. They think it's the whore of Babylon. So I was just like, what, and just took it all in, and I think explained, no, he was really good. This is perplexing to me. I just remember being perplexed and thinking that probably a scandal was about to break, and it kind of was, just slow. Right. I mean, you did your video on why did he really resign, and you covered the Vatican Bank scandal and the Vati leaks involving his butler. I can't help but think that you're right. That has something to do with it, and we're just not going to really figure out what until maybe hundreds of years later. Not you and I, because we'll be too old to read in a couple hundred years. But I mean, I don't really think that can be wrong. I mean, for people out there, I don't know the whole story, and neither does Taylor Marshall, but there's a lot more to it than he thought. He had a cold that day, and he's like, you know what? I'm going to stay in today. I'm going to stay in all days. I'm going to be an emeritus. I mean, Celestine gave up the papacy right after taking it, right? Right after assuming the papacy. Yes. This is not the same thing. People
and he went back to his private life. He didn't wear a white cassock. He didn't call himself Pope. This is a unique situation. And I know everyone's like, oh, are you guys going to talk about resignationism and was it a valid resignation? I believe it was a valid. Maybe that's a video for another day. I don't want to get into it.
It's kind of boring. Yeah. I think it was
people
valid.
Are super excited about it, but yeah.
Could do one, but the answer is probably it was valid. Maybe it wasn't, but that's just not, no one has the information to make that call. So we could do an hour and a half on that.
Right. Because you have to go back in time and psychologize Ratzinger Benedict.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Exactly. That's the problem.
And that's fine for a 5-minute segment on an otherwise substantial video, but 90 minutes or like a 3-hour video, like wink wink on psychologizing Ratzinger is just it's not substantial enough. No one has. He's insisted 3 times now by my count that this is sensationalism. He sticks his head out and he says this is absurd. That's very frustrating to hear if you're committed to this position of benevancetism.
People don't want Francis to be Pope, and so they're desperate for a theory that makes Benedict, the good Pope, still the Pope. And we're saying, well, maybe he's not that different from Pope Francis. And also the whole argument, I don't want to get too much into it, depends on the distinction and the division between the ministerium and the munus of the Petrine office. And they say, look, Benedict only intended to resign from one, not the other. But the problem with the argument is you are already assuming a false idea, which is the munus and the ministerium are distinct. And they're the same exact thing. It's like me saying, I want to leave my inheritance to my nephew, Ed Marshall, but not to Edward Marshall.
Right.
Doesn't matter. Right. It's the same person. So even though I have a whack understanding of dividing things in my mind, or someone says, I want to resign, he's the CEO, president of name a company. I want to resign being CEO. And he writes it all out and gives it to the board. And then 2 weeks later, like, well, I resigned CEO, but I didn't write president. Resign president. They're like, no, dude, it's the same thing.
Yeah. It's a mistake of law provision.
It doesn't matter. The ministry of St. Peter and the office of St. Peter are the same exact thing. You resign one, you resign the other. It's really that simple.
It's a mistake of law, mistake of fact distinction. You're exactly right. And it's just, that's why I don't think there's much of I don't think there's 90 minutes worth of a case there.
No.
Now, I guess some of this comes from Gorgeous George Gonswine saying that Benedict had planned to do this years before. Again, this is where I do start getting pause about some sort of backroom deal, U.S. Senate floor like deal where there's the St. Mafia that really did oppose bitterly, or at least pretended to oppose bitterly, his eventual pontificate. This would only hold if it was earnest opposition. But, maybe a backroom deal where he's like, well, I wanted to try my little, Karl Rahner-like, division between the two aspects of the office. And, so maybe if they're kind of forcing me out anyway, that'll give me a chance to do that. There's just a whole bunch of bad ideas in that head, in the German prelate's head. I don't care who it is. They have a bit of the schizo, even the German conservatives, the prelates.
That's right.
We're saying this even about Mueller for all of his force in that letter. And there's just a lot of schizo ideas that are in tension with one another, but they're all 2/3 of a Hegelian, so they don't believe in tension between contradicting opposites.
That's right.
It's a mess, folks.
It's a big mess.
The main takeaway that's not juicy or interesting that people need to hear is something you said about 20 minutes ago. And it's, if you're going to read a church theologian or philosopher from the 20th century, there's really only one guy you can go to that's trustworthy, right? There's only one guy. Who's that guy?
Gary Goulet-Grange.
Gary Goulet-Grange. And anything else is communist trash. Just think of it like that.
Not everything, but yes.
This is the way people have to think about it.
If you're going to spend a year or two reading theology and philosophy, if you didn't spend that first year or two reading Gary Goulet-Grange, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You've got to get there first. And Gary Goulet-Grange, just so you know, is sort of the eminent last thomist of the 20th century. Yeah, of the world. He was the nemesis of guys like Rahner, Kung, Schillebeck, Balthasar, Montini, the whole new guard that came in. He was the canary in the mine. He was ringing the fire bell and saying the house is on fire, and everybody just laughed at him. The
true nemesis, not the false Hegelian opposite of these guys, Gary Goulet-Grange, and the extreme, the extreme right winger. And no, people need to start thinking in these terms, because people out there, they don't, if they're like, I want to read one book on the church this half decade, they're like, that's my goal for myself. They're not. I mean, I'm not making fun of that. I'm just saying people out there, when guys like you or me are like, oh, here's who you should read at least before you go read Rahner or whatever, or any of this stuff. They're not, these people, most people only feel that they have the time to read one like church book every term of years.
Right.
And so I want to make it real plain for people. That's fine. Just don't read any garbage then. And pretty much everything is garbage now. Yeah. That's what people need to be told, because they're not theology grad students or Catholic philosophy grad students.
And when you meet a theology grad student, you're like, well, what are you reading? And they're like, oh man, I'm just ripping off the bone with, what do you read? Rahner, Kung. You're reading Kung. I'm surprised people are still reading Kung.
It's such garbage.
That's like saying, oh, I've been listening to great music lately. What do you even listen to? The Monkees? And you're like, what? People still do this?
Yeah, no, it's a lot like that.
Yeah, it's like I'm getting a master's in music. What are you studying? The Monkees. Like, what? You're reading... So, anywho, before we run out of time, I want to just do a quick rundown of the timeline of Benedict's resignation.
You do it. We should have opened with that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I did a 20-something minute video that's on YouTube, super popular. If you want all the details, watch that video. We'll link it maybe here at the end of this video. But here's the facts you need to know. This will just take a minute. In September 2010, the Italian government seized 23 million euros from the Vatican Bank because of laundering. And by the way, Tim, almost every single president in South America of these regimes has deposits, personal deposits at the Vatican Bank right now, 2019. Major money laundering is going on at the Vatican Bank right now. In 2011, Rome's Attorney General released the 23 million euros. In 2012, Tedeschi was released as the head of the Vatican Bank because of his alleged failure to fulfill the primary functions of his office. Also during this time, a 300-page dossier bound in a red binder, some sources say 2 binders because it's so thick, was compiled by 3 cardinals and was given to Pope Benedict XVI on December 17th, 2012. So just a couple months before he resigns. It's said that when he opened the binders and saw the names, it had to do with financial crimes and sexual crimes, primarily of cardinals. He decided that was the day that he was going to resign. Some people say that it also had photographs of cardinals in drag and all kinds of stuff, which sounds shocking. But when you think at the CDF, they're having cocaine-fueled gay orgies, it's like, oh, well, yeah. I mean,
nothing's shocking.
That's the one thing we know because of a police report.
Right.
What about when the police don't show up? What's going on at these parties?
Right.
So on January 1st, 2013, the ATM machines in Vatican City ceased working.
Right.
Due to the Deutsche Bank closing its accounts with the Vatican Bank on December 31st, the Sistine Chapel, which is the main moneymaker of the Vatican Museum for the Vatican, could only process cash for tickets on that day. On February 11th, Pope Benedict XVI announces his resignation. On February 12th, the very next day, the Aduno Group, a Swiss company, takes over the operation of the Vatican cash machines, which circumvents the Italian and EU regulatory pressures because it's Swiss. And then February 28th, Benedict officially resigns, and that's when you see him fly off in the helicopter.
Right.
Sadly. And then March 13th of 2013, Francis is elected Pope.
Day before my birthday. Yeah. Here's a birthday gift.
Yeah. Happy birthday.
I mean, yeah. Happy birthday. Here's the next 6 years of turmoil and scandal. Benedict knows where the bodies are buried.
Yep.
Figuratively, at least. And I mean, if you consider everything we've talked about is resides as a datum in that Cavesa, right? Like Fatima, Akita. Remember, he was one of the most knowledgeable men in the world on Akita. JP2, the council, the run up to the council, the run away from the council, Concilium, Communio, the new mass, the reform of the new mass, the undoing of the excommunication Summorum Pontificum.
He's involved in the excommunication of Lefebvre. He's involved in the lifting of the
undoing.
Yes.
Schizophrenic.
Yeah.
He knows 100 times more than everything we've known about every video we've done.
Yes. And
like Taylor said, he could clarify, he could shed light if he really wanted to. And yet every time he pops his head up, I used to consider this man an intellectual like Papa. Every time he pops his head up, he just says golf clap for Francis. Yeah. Or his pontificate looks a lot like mine. You might be saying it really is yours, but ostensibly it doesn't look like yours. Yours ostensibly was given over to the reform of the reform. Yeah, the bad guys hate you because you're undoing the reform. You were the Rottweiler going after the pedos and the homo heretics in the church. I don't know. Maybe he's being more on it. Maybe he's protesting too much.
Yeah. What do you think about this, Tim? What if the idea is, okay, he really is a reformer of the reform, hermeneutic of continuity. He really is, at the end of the day, closer to Casper than he is to Garrigou-Lagrange, which, we know that's the case. But maybe he said, hey, I'm going to go after the money, and I'm going to go after the pedos. I'm going to go after the homo heresy. Do you think that may be the reason why St. Gallen Mafia comes after him? That maybe St. Gallen Mafia doesn't care too much about theology and liturgy. Maybe they're worried about going to jail.
I don't know. I mean, to me, that turns all of this important. Because, see, I believe in the unity of word and deed, right? Sure. I believe there's a reason that these pedo guys and the homo heretics in the church act the way they act. As Fulton Sheen said, if you don't act as you believe, you'll eventually believe as you act. I believe at the core of me in the unity of these things, belief and behavior. So to me, that would be sort of banal, and I guess it could be a possibility, but I don't think that he wasn't really going after those guys anyway. He was going after their ideas. I mean, look what he did.
But hold on. But what if they know there's a binder and that there's a picture of them in a dress snorting cocaine in that binder?
I don't think they ever thought there was grounds that he would actually look. What's shocking to us, the faithful, is not shocking to him. He was around that. He's probably at parties like that, and he might have been like, I don't want to partake, but I think people are still red pilling on what it means to be a cardinal in the late 20th century.
Yeah.
I think they have lots of parties. Like, I don't think it's a secret. Look, they're broadcasting it by having these parties at the Holy Office. Even if you're like, oh yeah, Jim's kind of a prude. He's a teetotaler. He'll just stop by the party for 5 minutes, to keep up pretense, to keep up, appearances that he's not snubbing us. But he doesn't do his line of coke, and he's chaste.
He doesn't wear a dress. Yeah.
He does, and he just wears cassocks, not ball gowns.
Yes.
Then I think that's the most conservative most of the cardinals get. And I know there's some speculation in there, but it is signalized by the idea that they're having these at the Holy Office. Or even if you don't go to the party and they're like, this guy's disgruntled, we should keep our eye on him. He doesn't even show up for 5 polite minutes to the party as a teetotaler, to our gay, prostitute party. If it's at the Holy Office, then everyone knows about it. So I don't buy.
You think so? You think everybody knows? You think Mueller knew that there was a gay cocaine orgy? Because it begs the question: if you're going to do that, why wouldn't you say, "Hey, let's go out of town and get a hotel. We got the money."
Of course. So look, when people say to me in our comments, like, "Oh, you're so skeptical. You're so," I might be a skeptic, but I'm not a cynic. Like, people like me and you, we still hear that, and we're disgusted and we're shocked, and we're not like, well, that's the way of the world. All adults, dress and drag and
snort coke,
engage in bestiality or whatever in the world is going on. No, I'm not. I don't think that about normal, decent people. It has been evidenced with strong evidence, maybe not dispositive, that pretty much all the higher ups at least know about this behavior, which has been going on for 50 years. Yeah. I don't believe that even the good, mild-mannered ones don't know. We're just some schmoes, and we know all this. There's iceberg theory. You see 10% of the iceberg. Have you guys ever heard this? You see the top 10%. They know all of the iceberg.
Yeah, we just saw this report that, we've been saying that Cardinal Spellman was fruity. We've been saying that for months. And this new report came out of him groping these young men coming to his office. I mean, and Spellman was what, 50s, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If you go back and you watch a bunch of the Archbishop Fulton Sheen videos, and now it turns out they were arch nemesis.
Of course.
But Archbishop Sheen mentions him friendly. There's a video he did. I show him to a lot of my classes. He did on what happened on October 13, 1917 in 3 different cities that day: Fatima, Moscow, and Rome. And young Pius the 11th, is it 11th or 12th, as a young bishop that day was threatened by a communist. Did you know this? According to Archbishop Sheen, he was hiding in his residence, in his palace, and the guy came up to his chest with a gun, according to Sheen, and it bumped the pectoral cross and fell on the floor. And supposedly Pius picked it up and handed it back to him, and the guy ran off. And he was a communist agent. This happened on the 6th Secret of Fatima Day, or the 6th apparition of Fatima Day in Rome. And the funny thing is, then Sheen says, yes, and I am wearing that very pectoral cross because it was given by Pius to Spellman. And he's like, and Spellman was good enough to lend it to me. I was like, I thought you guys hated each other.
What year was that, though?
Well, I mean, this is Sheen's doing those broadcasts in the 50s. So
is it 50s or is it 60s? He did them in the 60s too, didn't he?
He did them from the 50s into the 60s, I believe. He did them for some term of years.
We're learning from the McCarrick and then the James Grind stuff and all that we're starting to learn that McCarrick was groomed and created under Spellman, and that there's this whole East Coast gang
network.
Yes. Yeah. And Spellman is the kingpin, because Spellman was a conservative. That's what they say, a theological conservative. He was not a big fan of the new mass, of some of these reforms. He went along with all of it, of course, but he was seen as more conservative in his life, but he was flaming.
Was he? No, yeah, that's a whole other show. But I thought he was more like a Schönborn or a Casper. That kind of.
It's hard to know. It's just people refer to him as he's not writing letters with Lefebvre or you know Ottaviani. I mean, he's not. I don't think he's that level. But in the United States, he was seen as sort of dragging his feet on the Second Vatican Council. That's just what people say. I don't know if it's the case. He died Spellman died in 1967, so he never even saw the 1965 modifications, but he never saw the actual Novus Ordo.
If he was a big conservative, what did he have to oppose Sheen over? Well, yeah, this stuff it's all that false Hegelian dialectic.
Right. Yeah,
it starts to mess with you. Like even us, it's like,
look, there are trad priests out there. I met one. Fortunately, he's been booted, but who use traddy everything to cover up, and they're active homosexuals. I mean, look, if you want to live a deceptive life and you want to live this dissolute, corrupt way of living, there's no better way than to get all these people thinking that you're a saint, and if you're in Germany and the way to do that is to follow Hans Küng, do it that way. And if you're somewhere else and you want people to think you're a Lefebvreite and you can still get your parties on, wear your lace 24/7, do it that way, So, I mean, these men, if you're given over to your appetites and turned over to a depraved mind, they're going to lie and pretend to be whatever in public. So even a conservative, even a Latin Mass trad, some of the worst pederasts have hidden under that mantle.
Of course. The question is, what are the rivalries made of? That's what people want to know about their senator or their bishop. Is like, okay, if he's good or if he's bad, if he's part of a rivalry, is it based more on ideology or is it based more on one of the rival party's behaviors that the other one objects to? Maybe this is how we should conclude. You make decisions in life based on the information you have at the time. And right. What we have now is the kind of it's a certain class of information. It's the class of information that insinuates that there's much more like it of its kind out there that we won't get maybe in our lifetime. So that informs the way I approach it. I don't know about what you want to say about that, but I approach this all with iceberg theory. There's a reasonable basis for belief that there's 90% more information like the stuff that gets leaked that would insinuate vastly more. Yeah. And you don't know how deep it goes.
Yeah. I'm more removed from that. I think I'm a little bit more skeptical. I am looking at, do they have orthodox theology? And by that, I'm meaning, are they Thomistic? Are they in the perennial philosophy and theology of the church? And I'm looking for holiness of life, which is deeds. And, if you're going to be a guy like Vigano and go all out and go into hiding, to me, that's a testimony that I'm going to trust of, okay, this is a guy trying to pursue the salvation of his soul. I like it. I'm going to go with it. To me, everyone else is under a cloud of suspicion, and I'm skeptical. People say, well, who do you trust? I don't trust any priest, really, not anymore.
Yeah,
sadly. And I have a lot of. That's not saying that I assume that all of them are pederasts. No, but I'm just saying trust, but verify. But I'm not. I've been betrayed and seen so many men who I thought were solid, both in the episcopate and in the priesthood, and been so deeply disappointed that at this point I'm guarding my heart, I'm keeping the cards real close for the next 10 years at least.
When you say priests, I was thinking more prelates. Maybe you meant priests and prelates.
Priests too.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I mean, look, when Papa leaves you in suspicious circumstances, you know, my wife always says, like the scene in Jurassic Park, right? When the lawyer leaves the kids outside the T-Rex den, right? He left us. It's not just that Benedict the 16th left us. It's that he left us on the brink of catastrophe, with the catastrophe.
With the T-Rex.
With the T-Rex. In the T-Rex paddock. We're right outside the T-Rex paddock with the unelectrified fences. This is us in early 2013. Day before my birthday, 2013.
Yep.
The T-Rex fences have been de-electrified. We don't know what's coming. A T-Rex is coming out of the paddock.
We're in a 1990s Ford Explorer painted up.
Yeah, yellow and green.
Yeah.
With a lawyer that's going to run to an outhouse porta potty and leave us kids in the back of the Explorer, which is not even running anymore.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not saying that I want to see Benedict consumed whole in a porta potty, because I don't. But that's what happened to the lawyer when he left the kids. And yeah, that explains the skepticism of guys like you and I. I don't know quite what to do with any of it, but and I don't think anyone does. But like you said, 2019 it's not gonna help the suspicious, twitchy eye, right? There's gonna be plenty more of this for a generation to come, at least. So buckle up. And Benedict, you know, we're 6 years into the ramifications of what you did. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph be with us on the way. You certainly left us in a hot mess.
Yep. Which is a great opportunity to say, pray the rosary. Our Lady of Fatima came down from heaven to give us an important reminder. And she showed us hell, and she said, pray the rosary every day. What do we do as lay people? We pray the rosary every day. We read scripture. We go to confession. We go to mass. We use all the traditional forms of piety and the sacraments instituted by Jesus Christ to save our souls and to save the souls of those around us. So pray the rosary, have hope, have joy. Just because all this, we're still smiling, right?
Making jokes.
Yeah.
Cross references in movies.
Jurassic Park, getting deep. Speaking of getting deep, everybody asked for TNT mugs and shirts, and they're now available. So you can get the TNT T. Marsh, T. Gordon shirts and mugs and bags. You can get your book bag, because I know everyone's walking around with their 5-volume Summa Theologiae of Thomas Aquinas. You need a bag for that, right?
And Garrigou-Lagrange.
You got to have your Garrigou-Lagrange volumes. So those are available too. So
you're not welcome to carry around Nouvelle Theologie books in these bags. We buy them. They're really sharp looking bags, I gotta say.
But if you get that bag, do not put Nouvelle Theologie book. If there's a Cardinal Casper book in there or Balthazar, just don't ever come back.
Hold that yourself.
Actually, the bag will catch on fire. We have that installed on there. And then also Lyndon, one of our watchers, he says that if you drink coffee out of our TNT mugs, it makes your coffee 30% deeper.
Yeah, is that the bells, whistles, and beards guy? The Eastern?
No, this is the guy who sent me the Going with the Flow Florence Byzantine mug. That was
Yeah, he sent me one too, a different one. Bells, whistles, and beards. I meant to drink out of it today, but instead I drank out of one of the best taco shops in Southern California, Huijos.
Yeah, well, he testified that the TNT mugs makes your coffee 30% deeper.
Deeper, it's clever.
I like it.
And it does.
It really does, yeah. It may not look like it, but it does. It's like Elijah's mug. So, all right, everybody, God bless. Pray the rosary. Out.